Hello and welcome to ConTinual's Supernatural Fandom Track. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and we'll be talking today about horror, humor, and home, what makes Supernatural so special. But before we get into that, let's start with having our wonderful panelists introduce themselves. Amy, start in.
Hi, I'm Amy Gardner McNeal. I am a communications expert. I work in advertising as a branding and digital content guru, and I also own Alliance Comics in Silver Spring, Maryland, one of the oldest comic shops in the United States.
Awesome. Melissa?
I hate this part. I am Melissa Kennedy. I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia. I'm not sure what I do anymore. I do a variety of things. I'm one of the co-author editors of Conventional Wisdom, which was a book where we gathered stories about the conventions, the supernatural conventions, and a big time fan of Supernatural. So.
Awesome. And Tanya?
Hi, I'm Tanya Cook. I teach sociology at the Community College of Aurora near Denver, Colorado, and I have been researching fandom-based charity work as a part of my research project, Always Keep Nerd Fighting, Fandoms as Social Movements, for the last 4 years, and I have Melissa's book behind me if anybody wants to see it.
I didn't know we were supposed to give our location. I'm just outside Washington, D.C.
Okay. And we did do, we've done a Q&A with April, and Melissa. Melissa wasn't able to make that one, but we did do a Q&A on Conventional Wisdom with April. So I'm just working on the editing for that now. And hi, I'm Gail Z. Martin. I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, near future post-apocalyptic, and more. And as Morgan Bryce, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. And in case you couldn't tell, I'm also a huge Supernatural fan, which is why we're here. So, Supernatural has, we've referred to it as the little show that could. It has lasted an amazing 15 seasons, over 300 episodes. I think the final count will be something like 327, which is a rarity in any TV genre, let alone a little show on what was the WB, which became the CW, and all of the things that have gone on. What do you think Supernatural, why do you think that is? Give me your top reason, and then we'll dig down from there. Tanya?
Yeah, oh boy, top reason. I'm going to say the fandom. And I can elaborate for many, many more minutes on that. But I think to like just slightly add a bit to that is like good timing, like a perfect combination of good timing, social media, and fandom. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Melissa?
I'll jump in. I think when I was trying to brainstorm this the other day, I was thinking, for me, it's the emotional realism. It's very unique, and especially when you have two male characters who are actually talking about emotions and dealing with real emotions, even though it's a fantasy show that, you know, we're talking about werewolves. But that's sort of what sucked me in the beginning, was that regardless of the trappings, this was real. These people were dealing with real issues and real trauma. And it worked in a way that I rarely see in television, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go with connection as my answer there. You know, and to drill down on that a little bit, it's not just the connection that we are able to make with the characters as we watch the show. It's also the fact that, you know, for a lot of us, life is fairly dull. And we like to think that there is a half step outside of our normal and abnormal or a paranormal that is really there. So through this show, you have been able to see, you know, a tunnel, a pathway into that, because the characters and their, you know, their general lifestyle and situations and the people that they encounter, you know, the other humans and the other people in the world that they encounter are very believable and identifiable for, you know, average folks. You know, these are people that you've met at the bar or at work or at church or whatever. But a half step outside of that normal daily life, there is this whole paranormal world that we would all really like to believe is there, because it would make life a whole lot more interesting. So what this does is give you kind of a bird's eye view into that, so you can connect with these characters who are using common frames of speech and you know, references to popular culture, TV shows and events and things that are happening just like your friends do when you're in conversation with them, but they also fight zombies.
Yeah, I love what all of you said, and I agree. And I think, kind of playing off something that Melissa brought up, and as well as Amy, for me, it was those two things together. It was, oh my gosh, you've got ghosts and vampires and werewolves. You had me at hello. And then having those two badass male characters who also have so much emotional vulnerability and show it. And that affection and love between the two brothers is something very rare. And to have two guys who can be badass and still have feelings and show them, and show fear and show loss and grief. So many times we skip over that in the action movies. You know, we just go right from the bam bam to the pew pew, and we skip all of the feeling part. And I love that Supernatural doesn't, and I really think that that has been part of its staying power.
And to speak to that, Gail, with the connection aspect, building on what you said, one of the most valuable things, I think, to allow the Supernatural brand to connect with its audience is that what you are getting is a warts and all kind of portrayal. So we all know guys like Sam and Dean. We all know guys who are tough guys and are dealing with some shit and are very, you know, are put up a very strong front, but have kind of a soft, gooey center. And often when you see those characters represented in pop culture or, you know, on television in some way, you only ever see the suit. You don't actually get to see the soft, gooey center. And one of the things, a parallel that I'll draw to this that is an advertising parallel, is that Disney and Disney parks are very careful about making sure that their characters, when they appear as their characters, and you never get to quote unquote see the zipper in the suit, which is something you get to see frequently on Supernatural with Sam, Dean, Cass, Bobby, Jody. You know, you get to see something past the front that they put on for the world of being strong and resilient and able to deal with anything, to see that in the suit, once the zipper comes down, they are human and relatable and soft and have had very similar experiences to the rest of us and are unsure and frightened and sad. And that really helps, you know, establish that connection. I have not been in the fandom nearly as long as the rest of you have. I've only been in the Supernatural fandom for a couple of years. So I've come into this from the perspective of watching 10 or 11 seasons of Supernatural all at once and then picking up on the episode by episode stuff. So I'm looking at it from both a brand perspective and from the perspective of someone who watched all the beginning stuff in one big lump and then essentially picked up on the, you know, the last few books in the series.
And I came in also in the middle of season 11 and just, you know, went in full bore. But then I want to come back to Tanya and talk about the fandom. And Melissa, also jump in here if you can as well, because you've been fascinated with the show longer. And I know the fandom took a little while to kind of get its feet under itself, because social media wasn't the power that it was back in 2005 that it is now. On the other hand, I've also read that some of the first fan fiction went up within hours of the first episode. So talk a little bit about how that fandom piece comes together to make this show what it is.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. And I might amend my answer slightly and say that those themes of family in the show are perhaps a common denominator, if you will, about what makes the show special and what attracts the loyal, passionate fandom base. Everything you're talking about, those not complicated but complex characters, right, that we can identify with, are why we can kind of see ourselves, even as women, right, or I'm assuming people who identify as women, in these male characters. Like, we understand what it's like to feel the pressures of family versus external roles, to be performing duties that are taken for granted often and never thanked, right? Like, how feminine of a theme is that? Essential work, but never a thank you for killing the monsters, right? And in our case, the monsters.
We've all had to stand up
Yeah.
and do like I'm fine. Everything's
Right.
fine.
that false
And
front,
that-
but
And
yeah.
then melt down later in the bathroom when we have some alone time.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, Dean smashing the Impala, right? So, but to speak to the fandom, I think it's the word of mouth and the way that the fandom considers itself an extended family, if you will, and how that was fostered by social media, but also conventions. Like, Melissa can talk about this too, but interaction with people at conventions, both fans and celebrities, I think really mattered. And I think Amy and Gail, right, it sounds like you probably got brought into this because of Netflix and the word of mouth, like the networking that happens between fans. So I think the show going on Netflix and the timing, that's what I meant by timing, like the streaming availability, the ability to binge it and to jump right into social media fandom, even if you can't get to a convention, that gives you that sort of distributed community effect and pulls you in and keeps you connected.
Most definitely. I mean, when I got sick is when I got into Supernatural. About 3 years ago, I started treatment for inflammatory bowel disease, and I was disabled and unable to leave my bed for about a year. And I was never a person who particularly watched television. I'm a huge reader. I read 5-6 books a week, usually, typically, of fiction and nonfiction. But I was too sick to read, if that makes any sense to you. I just couldn't really process stuff. I couldn't concentrate. So I asked several of my friends, like, okay, what is something that I can watch on television that there is a bunch of and I would probably like? And a friend among the things my friends recommended was Supernatural, and I had multiple friends recommend that to me. So, I sat down and watched it, and not only did it draw me right in and give me the opportunity to kind of escape from my particularly shitty life at that moment in time, but it then drew me into, as someone who does a ton of research and like background work in advertising, into looking into the larger community and becoming a part of that, which then reinforced my commitment to the show and the fandom as being something that was both unique and awesome.
And, for me, one of my adult kids had been telling me for a long time, hey, Mom, you like all this stuff. You should watch Supernatural. But I don't get a lot of television time. My husband and I write books full-time for a living. That just sort of eats all of the time there is. And so I finally, I do kind of save maybe an hour or two at night to do a little reading and watch something with my husband. And I said, well, hey, let's try Supernatural. They said it was good. Well, okay, we binge watched 11 seasons in 4 months in time for the beginning of season 12, as one does. So I could start live tweeting the new shows, which is how I got to know Lynn over at Fangasm and the lovely folks at Winchester Family Business, and got to do, some guest posts for them. And then when season 12 ended and we were going to be on hiatus, I really couldn't do without my fix, but I'd watched everything. So I started reading fan fiction, which I hadn't read since I was in high school. And I went down that rabbit hole, read hundreds of case fic, and then said, I wonder what this Slash stuff is like. Then read hundreds of Slash and said, this stuff is really good. I wonder what the non-fandom published male-male romance looks like, read several hundred of those and said, okay, this is too much fun. I'm going to come up with a whole new pen name, start writing a whole new set of books that are male-male romance. And
My
so
journey was very similar to yours, Gail. I completely understand that because I've never read fan fiction before. I read a ton of fiction and I read a tremendous amount of nonfiction, but I'd never read that before. So kind of going down the fan fiction rabbit hole, I am firmly on the Destiel train and all of that. So that has opened up a whole separate section of fandom for me. And then watching the way those interactions work as someone who deals with messaging and communications as my daily, my bread and butter. It's been very interesting to be able to put that lens on the supernatural fandom and see the way that those things work organically, that I, with no encouragement that I'm constantly telling corporations that they need to be a part of.
And Melissa, you've been quiet. Chime in here. I'm going to throw you to the wolves here.
Well, first I want to say I didn't come to the show until I think season 7. I binge watched the first 6 while I was sick and going through a horrendous divorce. And also couldn't read. I mean, I'm a big reader. I went to grad school in literature and all of that. But for the first time in my life, could not concentrate enough to read.
Doesn't that suck?
It freaked me out.
It's awful. Because I don't even remember not learning to read, but I read all the time as a comfort, all sorts of stuff. And then all of a sudden you're looking at a book and you can't read. And it's just holy shit.
I already felt like I had nothing to hold on to. My whole life was falling apart and I couldn't read. And my father was dying at the time.
There with you.
Yeah, it was horrible. And so I felt like, I kind of watched around. I was looking for something to just zone out to, and found Supernatural, and it was almost immediately, it was something, I don't even know how to explain. You guys know, but I don't have the words for it. There was just something about it that was so compelling and real. And I felt for the first time for me that there were, I know they're fictional characters, obviously, but these are fictional characters who are going through trauma the way that I was at the time.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, if somebody can write this, then somebody else is experiencing this. And it just was it was a lifeline, literally a lifeline.
Comfort. It's such a comfort because you can see that these characters who you can totally relate to are dealing with some super heavy shit. And you are also dealing with some super heavy shit at the same time. So not only does that connection get made, you can gain a little bit of both comfort and hope from it to build on. Melissa, I know you're right there with me on that you're going to come out the other side. And you're also, while you're siloed and alone in your bed or in your house or even in your own head, like Melissa and I were both dealing with, you're not really alone, because there are other people that are going through this. And even if they are just fictional characters, it's encouraging and comforting to be able to look at that and be like, okay, look, this is going to be over. This shit will stop. I will get out the other side. I will be better for it. I can be brave. I can be strong. I can get through this, and it's okay to collapse. Because I see these people get through it and then collapse too. So it's fine for me to be crying in the bathroom occasionally. I don't have to be the perfect patient or the perfect divorcee or the perfect whatever as I go through this. I can be sloppy and human.
There's also part of it that's completely cathartic too. I was sick and tired and very, very angry, and had 2 small children. And so there's nowhere to express that anger. So watching these guys lop the heads off of vampires just was
so satisfying.
Really
you're like, cut him up, cut his head off, beat the shit out of them, because you wish you could do it to whatever is, messing up your life at the time.
when Dean smacked the hell out of the Impala when
That
he
was so huge
angry.
for me too, Melissa. Oh my God, that was so satisfying because I'm sitting here while this like untreatable disease eats up my body, and there isn't anything I can do about it because it's not something I caused. It's my own bad luck, all that shit. And then Dean beats the hell out of the Impala. I'm like, yes, it just felt so good.
And it's interesting, touching again on fan fiction. We're actually going to do some panels on fan fiction later, but one of the things I also have noticed in it is there's a lot of AU fan fiction, alternate universe fan fiction, where people have written what I presume they themselves are struggling with into the boy's journey. So that may be a disease, that may be an injury, that may be some kind of other trauma that is not in the show, but there's like you said, catharsis. There's an opportunity to say, if Sam and Dean can face this and triumph over it, then I can too. And what that particular thing is varies dramatically throughout the fandom, but I think that that is something that has made such a loyal fandom and such a that has promoted such a long-running show. Tanya,
Yeah, I'm going to chime in if that's okay. Apologies for doing this. I've got family who decided right now to be loud. That's okay. So yeah, thank you. That's all excellent. And in people I've interviewed in the fandom and other fandoms, that's a really common pattern, is that we're going through some kind of trauma or really difficult illness or life event, right? And I've had some subsequently, so Amy will chat later about intestinal stuff, because I feel you, and mine's not that bad. But anyway, okay, moving on. I think it's really interesting that we as mostly women in the fan base, right, can identify with these folks so much, and then absolutely writing our own sort of traumas, possibly not necessarily me, but people who write fiction using that as sort of a group therapy, or if I know therapists who actually encourage their clients to write fan fiction as a way to deal with trauma and move past it, or just process it, right? So yeah, that's a really commonality in fans, is like finding that, going through a really difficult time, finding that thing to connect to, being moved by the story and seeing ourselves. I originally identified a lot with Sam because I left my very small town and was a bit unusual in that I left it and pursued higher education, and was definitely the first in my family to go to graduate school, etc. So I definitely identified with that in terms of, I'm not going to, accept this role that has been put on me. And then later I felt much more close to Jody, and I would say Dean, in a lot of ways, kind of continuing to deal with things outside of your control, wanting to latch onto and protect family at all costs, right? Being willing to sacrifice yourself for family. I think that is just such a common gender role for women. It's interesting that if we don't have sort of female characters to see ourselves in, we can find ourselves in these folks in their struggle, but it is very universal in terms of a human struggle. I want to add one more sort of personal note. When I was watching this show, this is sort of a weird aside, but bear with me. I, in college, had lived in an apartment, and at one point the next door neighbors decided to play on repeat the song, The Heat of the Moment. Okay. And people will know where I'm going with this. And this was the late 90s. I don't know what the hell was going on with them. Heat of the, right, over and over. And I was like, I am going to bash my head against the wall. And so when I got to Mystery Spot, and the other fun fact about me is I hate the movie Groundhog Day. I don't know why. Actually, I know why, but I don't like it. But I got to that episode, and it is my favorite episode because I felt like they were in my head, the fact that Sam's being tortured with the heat of the moment. I could not get over that. And I think that just that idea that representation of the kind of the small town Midwestern culture and people that age, I really connected with that. Like I felt that on a deep level. Like this is Dean's jokes, Dean's music maybe not the really sexist jokes, right? And the problematic jokes, but those are all what my head is telling me often. So I very much thought that they were representing something I hadn't often seen, which is like a working class Midwest vibe.
Sexist problematic stuff that you were bringing up that's early in the show.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely get a representation of someone's journey as they grow out of having come from that place and learning what the wider world is about. That's not something that's often represented because, you know, TV shows want to avoid even saying that stuff in the first place so that people don't think that that's how they are. But in reality, every single one of us has had a different journey in life and has come from a different source that teaches us things that may not necessarily be true or right in the larger world. And as you grow up, you have to learn to let go of that casually racist, sexist, classist kind of thinking that you're just born absorbing because that's all that's in your atmosphere. As a side note, I am a diversity and inclusion trainer and an ally educator for Black Lives Matter. So that's why that's something that I've really steeped in and having those conversations. But what you were saying about family, Tanya, that's really interesting to me because I don't have a family. So what's the part of family that's spoken to me is chosen family. I'm an only child. I have virtually no relatives on one side of my family, and on the other side of my family, they all live very far away. I've never met most of them. So I wouldn't know most of my cousins if I hit them with my car. But as someone who doesn't have a family, you know, it's the concept of chosen family being just as valuable has been a huge kind of validation and encouragement through Supernatural. I mean, I have friends who I call family and who I consider that way and consider me that way. You know, other people like, you know, who have come into my life because their parents have rejected them due to their sexual orientation, or they have, you know, moved so far away from their family that they no longer have access to them, or some other, you know, life cause has had them become more involved with their chosen family. And the chosen family aspect of Supernatural is so powerful because it teaches us that if your family sucks, screw them, get a new one, make it, you know, grab Castiel and Bobby and whoever the hell and put them together and make a family that works for you and is a family and is going to support you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think the family piece is huge with Supernatural, but oddly enough, for two guys who at the beginning of the show are essentially orphans and homeless, so is the concept of home and what home is or who home is and when you are home, what it takes to feel like you're home with all of the emotions that go with the concept of home. And we've seen Sam and Dean be at home in Baby. We've seen them
episode.
be at home in the bunker. We've seen them be at home at Bobby's house. And we've seen them lose those homes and find a new one. But that piece of home is an odd element in a show that, like I said, is basically about two orphaned homeless guys in a car fighting evil.
Home can be anything you want. It can be people. It can be a person. It can be a feeling. It can be a car. I'm lucky because I own a house that I am able to provide a home for a lot of people that are no longer welcome in theirs or don't have one. So we joke that our island of misfit toys, Thanksgiving and Christmas, I mean, that's you know, what I do with my family. You know, I have plenty of friends who have those kind of, you know, they can't go home because of, for a variety of reasons, who come here with us. And I'm fortunate, my mom actually moved in with us a few years ago because she's disabled, and she's a wonderful hippie that will take in all of the abandoned children. So it's been fortunate for a lot of people who didn't have a mom to be able to do that. But and that's a very Bobby-like thing.
And that is great and fantastic. And I think it ties back into that whole idea of home and found family. But I want to make sure I get Melissa and Tanya in on this too, because as usual, when we get going on Supernatural, we could do this all day. I mean,
Absolutely.
We could also, if I play moderator and move people around, it's just because everybody has so much wonderful stuff to say. I don't want to miss anybody. So,
oh yeah, healthy as hell. You got to shut me up.
You're the quiet one. I'm going to keep coming back to you because I don't want to miss out on what you have to say.
Well, I wanted to go back to what Tanya was saying about the I don't know so much about the Midwest aesthetic kind of thing in there, but I also had that journey of being the first one to go to college, working class background, all of that. And I think one of the things that I don't see talked about a lot when people talk about Supernatural, though, is the way they deal with class and trying to move between them. I'm like, I love Sam. Sam is like the ultimate character for me because I identify so strongly with so many of the things that he's gone through, with that whole yearning for home and having people you love and who love you, who are people you need to get away from and who are not, sometimes not good for you, and needing to get away and make your own home, but still loving them a great deal and having them want to put you in a particular role. And I'm not even completely satisfied with the way they've dealt with it in the show recently, actually, because it seems like they are almost coming down on the side of, this is who you are, you have to be this person, and that whole trip to college was just sort of a ridiculous pipe dream. You shouldn't have done that. But that journey, I think, for him was extremely important, and it was important for me to see that, because you really don't see it, or not very realistically. You don't see that tension between leaving home and people you love who are not good for you necessarily, and then going to a place where in one way you feel like, oh my gosh, these are my people, and you don't fit in at the same time.
I can definitely identify with that. Not to interrupt. Same page, and I will let you talk.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think the idea of home, I was thinking about this through this conversation, and I could definitely do this all day, Captain America chair. But it's very Wizard of Oz in Supernatural, right? Home is a state of being. It's a state of feeling. I think Sam had to leave to find himself and then go back, very much. And I agree with your assessment of later stuff for sure. But the idea comes up again and again of needing to construct your family and your home and find that and protect it at all costs, right? And that sometimes that means rejecting toxic relationships, like you see Cass, falling, Cass rejecting the angels sort of programming. And you could think of that as a metaphor for society, and we could go all up academic levels if we wanted to.
Another panel.
Yeah. So we don't have to do that. But so I right on, like, totally understand that found family, that family of choice is very, very another commonality in terms of fandoms that create this passionate, engaged fan base that we've found in our research as well, just to kind of move to that conversation. But home, that is so fascinating, because for me, I think I wasn't having a lot of health problems when I found Supernatural, but just to connect it back, I had recently moved from the Midwest, where I'd lived my whole life in Wisconsin, to Colorado, and was a little bit physically now distanced more from people I'm have a lot in common with, family, friends, establishing new relationships, establishing new sort of found family, and found Supernatural, and it felt like home to me. I think that's really interesting. I think that's probably why I fell into it so hard.
And building on what Tanya said there's an aspect of it that you touched on very briefly, but then you went into that awesome description of getting physical, distance from people. A lot of the Supernatural fandom identifies outside of the normal, quote unquote, normal spectrum. You've got a lot of people with disabilities, LGBT folks, people who are loners in their own community as, Supernatural fans who have seen a lot in this show that really speaks to them. And one thing that I've found to be super beneficial about it, and other friends that I've introduced it to with that, is that in the world, even when Bobby's in a wheelchair, even, even Charlie, with all of her trauma and, being a lesbian and all of those sorts of things. That is all both fine and not a limitation in the supernatural, in the supernatural world. No one is turning up their nose at them. No one is saying you are marginalized or you are invalid. They are just as valid as anyone else. And that is a huge comfort for those of us who are dealing with those issues in our lives. And as Melissa was saying with Sam, the places that you come from often teach you things that are toxic. And that could be that because you're LGBT, you're no good, or because you have some kind of disability, you are then shunted into the back world of life. Or as Melissa was saying, coming from a working class background and striving, is often looked down upon by other people that are still in that background and mindset. And Supernatural really brings us the idea that it's cool to be an individual and it's okay to reach for what you want. And it's okay to be angry as hell that you're stuck with these limitations and that you have to deal with this bullshit in your life, because Dean I identify with Dean because instead of being sad like Sam, he's beating the Impala up with a pipe because he's mad that this is what the world has to be. So I think that that's something really special that is brought to us.
And I think that one of the other things that kind of plays into all of that is that the characters have falling outs with each other, but they also find their way back. There is forgiveness, there's reconciliation. Sometimes Sam has to pretty much smack Dean up against the wall and go, you gotta quit treating me like I'm 10. I am always your little brother, but I'm always your younger brother, but I'm a grown-ass man now. You can't keep doing this.
Oh, we all have that friend.
All been there. And I think that one of the things I love the most about that is that people have falling outs and they come back to each other and they love each other enough to work through that. Sometimes it's bloody and painful and terrible. And with the Winchesters, they have to die once or twice to kind of finally get, their heads, nothing straightens them out on each other like another death and resurrection.
But those deaths are a metaphor too, and that's a whole separate panel about metamorphosis and chrysalises, and you might want to put that on the schedule.
I'm making notes.
I would say too that the idea of I love that point, Gail, about working through difficulties and sort of almost like a family therapy. Those guys really need therapy, but it's
where they go to the therapist with Jack, and it's supposed to be role play, and then they get into it.
That was so funny.
Yeah. But that idea that love is not a noun, right? It's a verb, and you have to make it an action and show it again and again and again. And it's not, any relationship is not just something you have, it's something you do in order to have that.
Yeah, families argue, friends argue. I mean, I grew up Irish Catholic in Baltimore. You fight with people, you argue, you yell, you say stuff. You don't not love them anymore because you're having an argument. You're passionately expressing your views. And occasionally there may be a physical aspect to that when you're young and you have, cousins or friends or whatever. But it's important for people to see that it's cool to get pissed at your family or your friends and talk through it and that become a thing, because that's how normal people live.
Well, and I think that also plays into the tremendous character growth that we've seen, and that having 15 years of this show allows us to see, is that they let the characters grow up. And one of the things I love the most that we've seen from, I would say, like season 11 on, is that Sam and Dean are no longer reacting to things like 25-year-olds. They are acting their age. And they are, you've got Dean saying, look, I put all that stuff behind me. All that matters now is that we are here and we are together, and I'm good with who we are. And you've got Sam finally forgiving John and being able to talk through that with him and working out their issues with Mary. But I love that they let them grow up and be guys in their late 30s, early 40s in
Right.
how they see the world and relate to each other, and left some of the more contrived drama stuff in the dust.
It was good the way
That
they
was
handled that too, because they made it a growing up instead of a, okay, we're refining the series into be something more modern now that it's gotten really popular and we have more budget and all that kind of stuff. They handled that as a, now these characters are growing up, and yeah, Dean's not hooking up with every girl at every bar anymore now that he's 40, and Sam isn't crying about not being able to go back to college now that he's 35. You know, they are having their experiences shape them into grown-ass men.
and that those experiences and what they want out of life changes. You know, Sam wanted to get away, but sometimes the things you want don't work out, and you may find that either it ends up being what you wanted more all along and didn't know, or that this is good, you can make peace with it and still be happy even if it isn't what you thought.
You can end up in a situation that totally is not at all what you wanted, and you still have to keep going too. And I think that's a lot of, you have to say goodbye to certain dreams because, you know.
I made some crappy choices and set some crappy dreams aside when we were 22 too.
Yeah.
And we're not all necessarily doing those things or pursuing those ideas anymore now that we've grown up. I mean, I wanted a lot of things when I was 25. I didn't get any of them because some of them were really bad choices.
Yeah.
And Sam and Dean certainly, you know, have sometimes cornered the market on bad choices, but they come back from it.
Yeah.
Tanya, we've missed you on the last round here. Any thoughts on all of that?
No, absolutely. I mean, I agree. I think it's the power of being on for 15 years is that they have been allowed to change. And I think that is important. I do want to say you had humor, and we haven't touched on that because I almost feel like we could have an entire discussion about that, but I wish they would bring back a little more humor that they had in the earlier seasons. And I think they can do it in a way that isn't contradicting the character growth. They have a bit in certain times, but that's also what really attracted me to the show is humor is my coping mechanism. So that's definitely how I relate. And I think, Melissa, you shared this with me a while ago, which was an article about Jensen and his ability to kind of have an internal conversation with himself as an actor. And then we see it's like he's having a conversation and we see his reactions, and him being so brilliant at that as an actor, right? That pulls you into the humor of Dean. And so I'd like to see a little of that more, you know, lighthearted, but I get it. That's not necessarily where they're at.
The great sardonic Dean, haven't we, Tanya?
Mm-hmm.
That was the best place that I identified with Dean was he was super sardonic and all that dark humor, and then throwing in the nerd shit, even while claiming not to be a nerd. It's like all of that is very, very relatable, you know. And so I missed that. I saw Gail writing down talking about humor as a whole separate panel because, you know, that's a thing. Because we've really been talking about family. It's been awesome. I've learned a lot from these ladies. I know it's been great, but we need a whole nother hour to talk about humor and where all of those jokes come from.
Well, and you know, I think that's another thing that makes it so relatable and has made them so real is not only that humor, which from a plotting aspect, tension, break the tension with humor. Now the next tense thing hits you twice as hard because you relaxed your guard. So there's a legitimate plot reason for doing that. Plus they both just play comedy so well. But I think also, and Amy, I think you mentioned this, all those pop culture references, which we still see, not quite as many as we used to, but that's how nerds and geeks talk to each other. It's a whole separate language of in-jokes. And when you can drop that in-joke and somebody gets it, that's how you identify your tribe,
Well,
because
sorry.
they didn't have to have it explained or look at you funny. They got the joke. And that I think has also been a bonding mechanism for
regular Star Wars jokes, have thrown a Star Trek thing into conversation here and there, even do it in public, because that's American pop culture, you know, and it changes a little bit from area to area, but yeah, it's perfectly common to do that.
I was going to say that when I first started watching, I got maybe 3 or 4 episodes in, excuse me. And I started going, who wrote this? This person, who came up with this show? This person has got to be roughly my age, because they've got to be Gen X, because the jokes and the music and everything is just spot on. And you know, those two guys aren't really, well, I guess Jensen is, but I had to go look it up because I was sure, and it is, yeah, he's you know, that whole generation too. But it's a first time I sort of felt like that was represented pretty accurately, much more than say Friends or something. Is that?
Oh man.
Edlund being both a comics writer, somebody that owns a comic shop, and a writer for Supernatural, has the friggin' like market cornered on nerd vocab, because not only is he pulling stuff from sci-fi, he's pulling in comic stuff, and then just stuff that is generated within the nerd community. And it was pretty awesome, because it literally sounds like you're sitting down having a convo with your friends.
Yeah. And he's not just making pop culture references, he's making fandom pop culture references. That's a very different thing than making a reference to something that's a current event or a celebrity or a sports star. But when you're quoting, you know, from Lord of the Rings, when you're quoting from all the different nerddom things that they mention, that increases that sense of family and community as well, because that's our in-joke, that's our secret language.
Connection, you can connect with the show again that way through nerd culture.
Yes,
Yeah.
Very much so. So we are actually coming down to the end of our time. It always goes so fast. Briefly.
That's what she said. No, sorry.
I'm 12, so I
see. Sometimes the Dean just comes out, or the Michael Scott, if you will.
And that's how we connect with Supernatural. That we know Dean would do the same thing.
Yep.
So is there any one thing, maybe a sentence or two, that you haven't gotten to say yet on this topic that you're dying to say? And I'm going to start with Melissa, because she's been our quietest.
I was just thinking that we've talked a little bit about the metaphor, but this show is so rich in metaphor and metaphoric potential that you can map your own experiences onto it so easily. There are so many hooks, I guess, and there is something about the show that reaches the level of archetypal rather than just entertainment. To me, especially those first 5 seasons are like a work of art in themselves. They're just perfect. But I think that's part of it, is this, that it gives you so many things to attach to, and so many metaphors that help you understand where you are yourself. Anyway, I don't feel like I'm explaining it well, but it's very rich that way. That's
very clear. Tanya?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I would just add, at some point in the conversation, we were talking about folks who feel marginalized being connected to this show. And that's absolutely something that we have seen in our research. If you feel marginalized by class, and I think, Melissa, we could have an entire discussion about class representation in this show for sure, or you marginalized about your sexual orientation, your gender identity, etc. My friend Riley with Wayward Daughters had said that, yeah, that's really what she sees as a commonality. People who feel marginalized are attracted to this group because they've found a commonality in each other. And we symbolize that, right, through what we wear, through our lingua franca, where we drop nerd references, etc. Yeah.
And that's honestly been one of the reasons that I really wanted, as one of the con runners for ConTinual, to bring in a strong supernatural fandom track, because I've been part of multi-genre fandom, sci-fi and fantasy, since I was a teenager. And in my chapter on There'll Be Peace When You Are Done, I talk about how that has saved my life and how much it means to me. And I see these two fandoms that haven't done a whole lot of interconnection and really should, because they're speaking a lot of the same languages. And so that's one of the reasons we're here, folks, is I'm trying to bring folks together from those two streams and go, hey, you know, you really have a lot in common. You ought to look at this. Amy?
Last weekend, our fandom raised $170,000 for the NAACP Defense and Education Fund in a one-day scavenger hunt event that involved me pretending to be on the U.S. competitive napping team.
I might be able to handle that.
If that is the only explanation you ever get for the amount of good that our fandom is able to do, that is clear. And the inclusion and connection that we get as fans to both the show and each other not only provides us with a supportive community that can help us get through life and get through our problems and meet people all over the world who are just like us so that we feel like we're part of something, we can also use that and leverage that to do great things in the world as a fandom. And that has tremendous value and is really the fullest expression of what Supernatural is and what it has brought into our lives and what we then magnify it into the world.
Amy,
Wow.
you just said exactly what our research project is about. And I thank you so much for that, because that's exactly what we've been looking at, is how that happens. Yeah, it's okay. Awesome. We will talk. Because I need that. But yeah, that idea that, you know, this fandom takes its love for the show and love for each other and does positive good in the world. And last weekend's Gish was a turning point. It was a pivoting toward fully social justice, racial justice, inclusion. And so we have a blog post coming out about that. And I know that's another
I've been using that panel
topic.
Nisha and Jensen hosted all week as part of my Black Lives Matter activism to send to people who are new to the conversation on racial and social justice and have questions, so that they can talk to people like, I can't believe Misha got Daryl Davis in that panel. He is an unbelievable activist. What they have put out and what they did there has been able to be translated into something fantastic.
Yes.
And
so many people.
We're going to talk more about many of these topics. I'm already thinking of new panels.
I would like to be in the social justice panel.
And I know in Tanya and Melissa and other folks on their academic pieces of this. And
I'm excited.
But this has been so much fun. Yes.
I'm just going to gesture now so I don't plug up the.
This has been so much fun. We do have to wrap things up, but thank you so much for being here with us. You want to quickly say where people can find you on social media, and then we'll have to say goodbye, but we will be back again. So Tanya.
Yes, I'm Tanya Cook. You can find me on Twitter at AKNerdFighting. For Always Keep Nerd Fighting, and you can also find me at Prof. Tanya Cook. But if you want more of the geek side, AK Nerd Fighting, and also on Facebook, AK Nerd Fighting. Yeah.
Awesome. Melissa?
Thanks.
You can just find me on Facebook mainly. It's Melissa Smith Kennedy. And Conventional Wisdom has a page we have neglected for a little while, but it is there. And if people go on there, we'll start talking again.
Awesome. Amy?
You can find me on Facebook as Amy Gardner McNeal. And I run a small blog that I use for social justice work on the weekends to inform people about what is going on the ground in DC who need to find bathrooms and water and lawyers and things like that at DC Oracle.
Okay.
Like Batman Oracle.
And I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Bryce. You can find those websites at gailzmartin.com. The Z is important. And morganbryce.com. All of my Twitter and Instagram handles are some variation of Gail Z. Martin or Morgan Bryce, so I'm pretty easy to find. And I also run the Supernatural TFWNC Facebook group, where we talk about all this cool stuff all the time with plenty of pictures and memes and fun stuff and Netflix watches and group stuff. So come on over and check us out there. Thank you guys so much for being with me today. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And folks, this has been the Supernatural Fandom Track for ConTinual. Stay with us. We have a lot more love and lore of our favorite show coming to you. So stay tuned. We've got more coming your direction.